Hi, this is Matt Redham. I'm the Butte County Office of Education, School, and Community Wellness Advisor. Today, I want to talk a little bit about, well, one of my least favorite topics lately, and that is stress. Um, we have been through so much in this county, and as a system, Butte County Office of Education, we've also been through a tremendous amount. We can look at what we've been through the dam and the fire and now COVID, and we can easily see all the ways in which it reminds us how little control we have. But we can also look at the ways in which we have collectively come together. We have collectively engaged in creativity and really, really, really out of the box thinking. How we have been there for one another, how we have been there for our surrounding communities. Today, I want to talk about stress. I want to talk about our collective response to what we have all been through. I want to talk a little bit about some things that we could do, some very basic things, some things that you all have probably heard time and time again. But if you're anything like me, it's oftentimes like the 10th or 11th time I've heard something that I go, oh, that gratitude thing, I've never heard about that, but I'm going to do it. And I think this is one of those times that we just need to remind ourselves and one another that in the midst of the abnormal, most things are normal. We have this propensity, we have this desire to not only understand every single piece of ourselves and those around us, but we also have this desire to really judge everything about ourselves and those around us. And there are times when that's really effective and really important and a great strategy. And there are other times when we just can't find any answer. And no matter how hard we try to make sense of what we're going through, it ties us in knots. And when we become tied in knots, we have this really common thing that we do, which is we assume we're not doing it correctly. We assume we're not doing it right. And we look at something like a global pandemic, and of course, rationally, we know there's no way I'm supposed to do this right. But oftentimes we feel as though there's something we're missing. So I want to talk very briefly today about a few different kinds of stress, and to have those of you watching this video begin to think about, hey, what kind of stress am I under? And what is it doing to me? And is that okay? I want to talk very briefly about sort of that real fine line between stress and mental health, right? And when we sort of creep into this place when we have to be a little aware of our own mental health and wellness. And I want to talk about some real brief, simple strategies that can keep us having a better sense of our ability to push back against what we're all experiencing. One of the things I always think about when I'm asked to talk about how we are all collectively doing is I first, because I'm a narcissist, think about how am I doing? And as I was thinking about recording these, I thought about, how am I really doing? Like, do I want to fake it, or do I really want to get a sense of how I'm actually doing? And what I realized through this process, maybe similar to a lot of you watching this, was most of the time, I didn't have a sense of how I was doing. And that the reason I didn't have a sense of how I was doing was because I was always doing. And I knew intellectually, because I was told and because I understand it, it's what I do for a living, I'm the school and community mental health and wellness advisor, that we should stop and take even 3 minutes to get a sense of how we're doing. But this phenomena happens when we're in a state of survival or heightened stress or heightened arousal, that the things in front of us take on exaggerated meaning. That's not to say that the things we're all concerned about and we're doing aren't important. They are. But they often they have the potential to feel as though they are life and death. And there's a reason for that. We really have within us the propensity for three different kinds of stress. One kind of stress, positive stress, is actually a really, really necessary, healthy, helpful thing. Not only helpful for building resilience in ourselves, but also helpful to actually grow our neurons and to expand our brains and to expand our understanding of what we are able to do. For children, this positive stress is actually vital for learning. It's vital for brain development. It's vital for growth, and it's vital for mastery of anything from language to math to reading to social relationships. And that doesn't change when our brains are developed, and we still need that. So we could think about positive stress in this way. It is something that is a challenge, and it's a challenge that may be accompanied by sort of a release of cortisol and what we call a stress response. But we're able to move through that challenge. And in moving through that challenge, we learn what we're capable of. We learn the tools that we need in order to get through that challenge. We learn what our sort of level is at which we need to stop and gather ourselves and rethink our strategy. You know, positive stress allows us what we call in trauma work post-traumatic growth. It's the ability to move through something with support, to gain resilience from it, and then to be able to step back and say, you know what, that was difficult, but I really learned something and I grew through that. Then we have what we call tolerable stress. This is the kind of stress that probably most of us are really familiar with. This could be stress that's the result of a deadline at work. It could be stress that's the result of a difficult relationship. It could be stress that has to do with money or has to do with the state of the world. This is the kind of stress that I believe most of us are feeling probably more often than we'd like. Tolerable stress is more than positive stress. The level is higher. Our brains thought that there's more at stake here is higher. And then we have what's called toxic stress. Now, many of you have heard myself, and some other folks at BCOE, and probably some other folks in the community talking about ACEs, or trauma or traumatic stress or toxic stress. What separates toxic stress from those other two forms of stress is really toxic stress occurs repeatedly. So I go from one situation that's really stressful, I leave that situation, and then I go to another situation that's really stressful, and then another situation that's really stressful. And I might live in a community that has a lot of stress, might have some violence. So toxic stress really is about our bodies not being able to put the brakes on. So with positive stress, I can always put the brakes on, right? I can either escape that situation, or I have somebody right next to me doing the challenge with me. With tolerable stress, we might have a context that's really stressful, but it leaves, or we leave it, and we're able to put the brakes on, and our body sort of resets itself. With toxic stress, that can't happen. Now, I can't tell you watching this video what kind of stress you're under. I don't know. I can tell you that many of the communities that we live around and many of the folks that we work with, probably some we work with as coworkers, have experienced toxic stress. They might not have ever before the fire, but all of a sudden they got in a circumstance in which it's very hard for their body to turn off. Other folks are just in tolerable stress, but in tolerable stress a whole lot more than they ever were before. Whichever type of stress it feels like you might be under, the remedy or the pushback against that stress is pretty similar, which is we need to somehow find a sense of safety and we need to turn our brakes on. And with toxic stress, that could be more difficult for those of us who are in environments that are constantly threatening, that are constantly stressful. That can be a real challenge. But even within toxic stress, we're able to do that. So let's look really quickly at the line between stress and the different kinds of stress that we might be experiencing versus mental health. You know, there's significant mental health disorders that we can go through. We call them major psychiatric disorders. And then there are sort of what we, for lack of a better word, there are these disorders or states that we can get in, or mental health difficulties that are far more common. And these might include anxiety, generalized anxiety. That might include depression or dysthymia. Dysthymia is like a lower level depression that goes on for a really long time. And there is a relationship between stress and mental health. We know that if you grow up with toxic stress, you're going to have maybe a greater risk at developing some struggles with your mental health and wellness. During a time like this, during the campfire, what we saw is we couldn't certainly make a prediction about whether or not this, and this you experienced, and so you're going to be depressed or you're going to be anxious. But really, we realized that the longer uncertainty went on, right? The longer questions weren't answered, the longer that folks were in the same position, whether that's in temporary housing or dealing with insurance, that it was more common to have symptoms associated with anxiety, symptoms associated with depression. We know in COVID-19 currently that many people are reaching out for mental health support, which is excellent. But it also tells us that many people, far more than typical during the course of a month, are reaching out for supports that they may never have had to reach out before. The difference between stress and, let's say, slipping into maybe a depression or some anxiety is stress will, again, they'll have some breaks. And so you will have these moments when you feel as though, oh, I understand what's happening, right? I can enjoy my kids. I can enjoy this moment. I can enjoy that walk I took. Anxiety, for example, tends to permeate everything that you do. And it might keep you up at night. You might have nightmares. You might have a reduced appetite. But what all of these things have in common, whether we're thinking about, am I struggling with something a little bit more significant than just different types of stress? Have I sort of slipped into a place where I'm a little concerned about my own mental health or wellness? That there's really two strategies that we can employ that can help us answer those questions. The first is having a loved one or having somebody you're close to give you feedback. Most of us are around people who know us. And oftentimes those people who know us can give us feedback about how we're doing in a way that we can't gain in other places. The other tool that we can use is to increase our level of self-awareness. And the way that we increase our level of self-awareness is actually kind of simple. We stop. We stop and we notice. So this is one of the simplest but most difficult concepts, certainly in my life, which is I know I need to carve out a few minutes to check on how I'm doing. But like the Zen Buddhists always say, the hardest part of meditation isn't meditation, it's actually sitting down on the mat. I find that that's true for carving out time as well. So I want to just take a minute to do just like a really, really super simple technique that can give us a sense, can give you a sense of where you're at. And it's called a body scan. And we use it in therapy, they use it in healthcare system, they use it other places. It's a relaxation tool, but it's also a tool to assess where you're at. Now, whether it's stress or whether you're kind of slipping into, some concern about maybe is this anxiety a little more than anxiety, or I'm kind of down? Is this down a little more than down? One of the things that can be helpful before you reach out and get somebody else's opinion about that is just to schedule a little bit of time to just stop. And when we stop, we just engage in a very quick activity. So one of the ways we can do it is just put your feet on the floor, have your arms by your side. Maybe take a quick deep breath. You don't have to close your eyes. This doesn't have to take, a whole bunch of time. You could do it by yourself. You could actually do it in a room full of people. But what you're going to do is you're going to bring your attention to your feet. And you're going to move from your feet to your legs, from your legs to your back, from your back to your shoulders, from your shoulders to your hands, from your hands to your gut, to your stomach, from your stomach to your chest, from your chest to your face. And what you're doing along each of those little stops is you're just noticing. You're not judging it. You're not making a statement about it. You're just noticing. So if I were to just do a body scan of my stomach, for example, I would say, okay, a little tight, little butterflies in there. And then I move up to my chest. Ooh, I'm not, a little tight, My jaw might be a little tight. So after I'm done with the body scan, I might think to myself, what does this tell me? So we know that if you're under stress, or if you're experiencing some difficulty with your emotions or the state at which you're in because of everything we've been going through, you're going to have some commonalities, which is your stomach is going to be tight, probably. Your appetite's either going to go way down or it's going to go way up. We know that when you're in a state of survival and a state of stress, that this is often pretty frequent or pretty common. The other thing that can happen is your breathing. Your breathing will become shallow. So you'll lose a sense of, you'll think you're breathing normally, but when you pay attention to it, you go, I'm not even taking full breaths. You might notice your hands are kind of clenchy. You might notice your jaw is clenchy. So we do this for a couple reasons. One reason is very simple. It's information. It just tells us, holy cow, I didn't realize I am pretty stressed out. Like when I take this all as one deal, I notice that I'm pretty stressed. The other thing that it does is as soon as we bring attention to a part of our body, it has this remarkable effect. It doesn't make it go away. It doesn't make maybe some heaviness in your stomach suddenly feel like butterflies and light, but it does change. It'll shift. And so when we bring attention to a part of our body, this weird thing happens when it changes. And part of what's happening there is when we notice ourselves, we have a different experience of what is going on with ourselves. And when we notice our breath, usually, automatically, we will take deeper breaths. So a body scan is a really good tool to get a sense of, how am I actually doing? If you notice that, your thinking has become really foggy, that you feel so anxious that you're not eating a whole lot, you're not sleeping a whole lot, or you're feeling pretty down and you're having some thoughts you're not comfortable with, I want to say that it is absolutely imperative that you reach out for help, either through EAP, let a loved one know, let myself know as a school and community wellness advisor. But know that there is a fine line between I am stressed and that is perfectly normal and healthy within everything we're experiencing, and I'm slipping into a place that I'm not comfortable with. I cannot tell you how many people have reached out for help, have said, I'm just gonna, I think I need to talk to somebody. And these are folks that, may never have talked to anybody in their life. Isolation, the inability to be close to those that we trust and that we love, within physical proximity of them, We don't know exactly what impact that's having on folks long term, but we do know it has an impact long term. The other thing that we can do to begin to push against the stress that we're all feeling is we can institute what we call micro routines. Now, if you're anything like me, our routines have been thrown completely on end. And where we once had some order, it oftentimes feels like now that has been completely flipped and we have chaos. We might be in the same house, we might be with the same people, but the event that we are experiencing is so unique, and our brains don't have a template of comparison for it, that it feels as though we have no predictability. We have no certainty. When we don't have certainty and predictability, we then have a lack of safety in our body, and we're much more likely to be at a higher level of stress and in survival for longer than we normally would be, even in stressful circumstances. When this happens, one of the things that's really helpful is to institute any type of routine that we can. And so if you can do that throughout the course of your day and get it really regimented, that's great. I can't do that. I have two kids, 11 and 8 years old. So even if I regiment everything, it's not going to go that way. So what I can do, and what Dr. Perry, when we spoke with him about, what he talked about was any little replicable, repeatable routine is going to really, really help. And it's going to help in a way that is both noticeable and sometimes totally implicit. So if I say I'm just going to wake up at this time every single day, and when I wake up, I'm going to walk and make my coffee into the kitchen. I'm going to go from the kitchen outside. I'm going to stop. I'm going to take 5 deep breaths. I'm going to come inside. And then the rest of my day is going to be what it is. And then at night, I'm going to brush my teeth at the same time. I am going to get in bed the same way. I'm going to read the same book. Those things, now, there are a million different variations on this, but even if all you're doing is bookending the same thing in the morning and the same thing at night, you're actually building in your body and your brain some sense of order. Now, if you can sort of stagger that throughout the day, that no matter what happens in the day, I do these 5 or 6 things at the same time and generally the same way, it's going to be super helpful to you. Now, lastly, I want to talk a little bit about this concept that was always super hard for me. And the reason it was difficult for me, I think, was because I was inherently a cynic, but also because I couldn't understand how this simple thing could make this much of a difference. And then I really started to read about the science of it, and it became really hard for me to argue with. And this tool of keeping ourselves healthy and well, especially during something as extreme as what we're going through, is gratitude. I know. It feels like gratitude may not be enough to deal with global pandemic, but hear me out. We know that gratitude, just thinking of 5 things you're grateful for and recording them every single day, has a dramatic impact on your outlook on life. It can have an impact on how you feel. It can have an impact on how you think. Now, if you want more information about gratitude, you can go to thegreatergoodberkeley.edu, and they have a tremendous amount of resources about the research associated with gratitude, about techniques that you can do. But one thing we know gratitude does is it forces your thinking, your brain, when it's going this way on a track, to suddenly turn this way. And what they also find is you can almost do it without totally believing what you're writing down, right? So you might write something down and say, well, I can't think of anything because you're stressed and you're not in a great place, and things seem like they're not going to change. And so I'm grateful for my health. Now, the first time you write that, the second time, the third time, but eventually you might find yourself saying, I'm grateful for my health. So Gratitude is about the process of asking our mind to do something that inherently it doesn't want to do. So when we're stressed, we typically want to move down that track of being stressed, even when it doesn't feel good, even when it feels really not good. And so practicing gratitude forces us to really put in our mind, put in our consciousness, the things that are right in our lives. Now, this can be done by, writing it down on a list. It can be done just off the top of your head. But again, the more routine it is in this current context and what we're dealing with, the more effective it's going to be. One of the things that we do in my house is every night when we're sitting down to dinner, everybody gets their plate down and we do our thing, we get our forks, and it's okay. 2 things you're grateful for and 1 apology. Now, I've yet to convince my 11-year-old to apologize for anything, but he does the gratitude. And in fact, we all do the gratitude. And it's funny because the days in which we feel really tuned up, it always takes us a little bit longer, but we find something. And I'll tell you what, it is one of the only times during the day that I feel like my body and my brain slow down. So I'd encourage you to try, if you can, to practice gratitude in whatever form you can. I want to thank everybody for listening. I feel like I think most of us do, woefully unprepared to answer any questions about what we're going through and have any definitive answers. But there is one thing that I'm absolutely sure of, and I was sure of it the day after the fire, and I've been sure about it every day since, that we can lose a lot of what we consider to be normal. We can lose a lot of what we consider to be needed. And those things are painful. And those things shake up the snow globe of our life. And they make us see things in a different way, and they make us feel things in a different way. But the one thing that has been consistent through all of this is the way that we're best able to heal is with other human beings. And the most consistent and the most easily accessible and the most effective way that I personally have been able to stay relatively healthy and well throughout this whole thing is other human beings. And prioritizing and remembering my need for those people, and prioritizing and recognizing that as soon as I ask somebody for help, as soon as I tell somebody I'm not okay, it begins this a magical sort of reciprocal process of us collectively healing. I want to thank everybody for doing amazing work. I want to tell you that we are all in this together, and I want to wish you health, and I want to wish you safety. Be well.